already decided that I'm going to do one more in my Interlude miniseries after this one. It's going to be called Interlude3. Trust me, it took weeks to come up with that name. I had to go through a bunch of marketing people and online analysts and a bunch of creative designers, and they said, if you're doing Interlude3, the next one should probably be Interlude4. It just goes to show that I'm a little slow on the uptake sometimes. No, I'm totally kidding. I come up with that all in 15 seconds. But anyway, picking up where I left off last time in Interlude 2, I was talking about self-defeat, and I went through small examples with driver's education as a kid. If you're in constant fear of something, you're going to find it. And then it was the waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then I stopped drinking on my own. I wasn't doing any support work or recovery work or anything. I was basically just kind of guilting myself into not drinking anymore. And guilting yourself into things, that's about as long as you can expect it to last. Of course, I relapsed, and it wasn't until I got into full-blown recovery mode and surrendered all of this garbage that things started to fall into place. Gee, imagine that. Each one of these examples kind of gives you an idea of an escalation, but the basic premise, the basic thinking is already there, and has been there, as I said a couple of podcasts ago on another subject, has probably been there since the day I was taken home from the hospital and was first exposed to an alcoholic, codependent, fearful, shrouded home where things that appear good on the surface are ugly once you dig under the surface. That's probably the simplest way I can put it. And it all comes down to, there's a biblical reference here, to the outside of the cup being pristine while the inside is filthy. Okay, do you want to drink out of that? Do you want to take in life from that filthy cup? Most of us would wash both sides. Now, that's in something simple like drinking a glass of water or chocolate milk. That's an Easter egg left in there for one follower on Twitter. Anyway, think about it. If we're not going to work on the inside and we're just going to work on the outside, we're doing ourselves a huge disservice. You know, think of people you know who have a immaculate front yard and their paint job on their house is great, and when you walk in, it looks like a pigsty. Okay, what do you expect? Okay, if you're only working on half of it, then this is what we get. And then we wonder why everything falls apart. So, I was brought up in that culture. Everything is pristine on the surface, but as soon as you get under the surface, it's a mess. And I think because I was always having to live that lie, live under that fake supposition, I think I carried it through my entire life. And I said I was going to take this segment or this episode to concentrate on the ultimate issue in my life. And I've alluded to this many times before. In many different forms of recovery, they say, go back as far as you can, start on what hurt you. Start on where things went wrong. Start on an event or a person that you feel knocked your life off kilter. Well, for me, not having a relationship with my daughter while she was growing up past the age of about 4 screwed me up. And I say that not in some dramatic sense where it was like, oh my God, my life just went into a tailspin after I lost contact with her. No, not like that. But it was a hole in my life that nothing was going to fill. And people in recovery circles, Christianity circles, will say that everyone has a God-shaped hole. Now, take your philosophies and stick with them. I'm not trying to convert anyone. I'm just using this as an example, okay? There is a God-shaped hole that nothing else will fill. And we try to fill it with substance. We try to fill it with gambling, with relationships, with sex, with overeating, with you name it. And we will try to fill that God-shaped hole with something less than God. So there was a daughter-shaped hole in my life as well. And when I started dealing with my issues, obviously that was a huge issue for me. And this is something I'm going to get into as I go along in these episodes. There's a tremendous amount of shame with mental illness. There's a tremendous amount of shame and stigma that comes along with being abused and the trauma that causes, and obviously with substance abuse. But there is a segment out there of men especially who are not in contact with their children and haven't been for some time, and it's a source of shame. Now, the people on the other side of the fence will say, you should be ashamed of yourself. That's not true. We should feel responsible for that. But shame is something that we can overcome in these situations. All situations happen for a reason. Think of every relationship you've ever had that went sideways. I just saw something on Twitter earlier, or Facebook, I think it was, yesterday, that said, have you ever noticed that people will just stop talking to you rather than admit they're wrong? And that's probably not too far from the truth when it comes to my first wife and I. And I'm not going to throw people under the bus. I'm not going to go down a long list of he said, she said crap. But the bottom line was, from a very early age, my daughter grew up without me. And from my point of view, there's a tremendous amount of shame, stress, frustration, obviously resentment and anger that go along with that. But it gets to a point where you have to realize that these situations are beyond our ability to reconcile. They're beyond our ability to fix. You can't fix all things by just trying to be the nice guy or gal. Sometimes we just step into traps that we can't get out of. And this was my trap. This is not the reason I drank. I drank before the child was born, contrary to what some people have said. But, this was not the beginning of, oh my God, I went into an alcoholic frenzy because no, none of that. This is all me. But the problem was I spent the better part of 20 years not being in contact with my firstborn child because I had stepped into an anger and resentment and frustration trap that I simply could not walk out of. I couldn't get back out of it. And I think it has its roots in what I said last time, self-fulfilling prophecy. Feeling as though you have to keep a veneer over the top of life and make everything look functional while underneath it's filthy. While on the surface, when this child was born, as I've said before, she changed my life in that a lot of my anxiety issues at the time, this is pre-diagnosis and this is pre-panic attack days, this was just the what-if thinking and the out-of-control worry type of stuff that I had, I believe, my entire life. At least as far back as I can remember, it was all there. But those things had started to subside, all because she came into the world. I stopped asking myself why I had been born, because I had a purpose. Every time I saw this kid, every time I changed a diaper, every time anything, every time she drew a breath in my presence, this was the reason I was born. This was why I was here, was to be her daddy. On the surface, it's very easy to say, well, that easily should have been enough. Well, ask yourself, as a parent, has having children solved your problems? Has it fixed your marriage? Has it calmed you down? Has it made you more responsible? Has it made you less involved in destructive behaviors like any number of things? We will always love our children, regardless of anything in this life. Nothing will remove that, and certainly nothing on the outside can take it away. But to say that my life is great and will be even better if I just keep having kids is not true either. There's a lot of work that goes into relationships. And if you think you've arrived at a certain point where you no longer need to work on a relationship, you're in some serious danger, and expect that relationship to go no further, or to stagnate, or to fall apart, or to whatever. So where the self-fulfilling prophecy side of this comes in is I am always defeated before I even start. And it's a subliminal thing. It's a subconscious thing. It's underneath. Even with these podcasts, I think I mentioned early on that I finally had to get to a point of frustration in my life where I said, I'm hitting the record button and I'm hitting publish 10 minutes later, and to hell with the sound quality being perfect, and to hell with my thoughts being completely scripted and everything just you know what? I'm not a college graduate. Why do I have to sound smart? People who sound smart have all the same issues as the rest of us do. Sometimes bigger ones, deeper ones. I don't have to be anything except who I am. And that is something I forget and have to go back and work on over and over and over again. But I didn't know any of this when I was 19, 20, 21 years old. But this little girl in my life was the end-all be-all of my existence for those first couple of years. And it became increasingly hard to spend any time there because I didn't fit into the pre-designed way that her life was supposed to be. I had very little input into priorities in that family, in that life. And if you struggle with self-defeat, the ugliness underneath is going to bubble to the surface at some point, and you're constantly looking for that train wreck, you're going to find it. And you want to avoid it, but at the same time, you can just feel it getting closer and closer all the time. You will find that train wreck. That other shoe is going to drop. So when I got divorced, I decided I was going to be the best divorced father I could be. Totally screwed that up. I didn't do a very good job of that. And that was self-defeat as well, because I thought every time I picked my daughter up, I was taking her into my little rinky-dink apartment. I didn't have nice things. I felt like, so I had this pristine picture in my head as well of how her life was supposed to go and what environments she should be around and in what environments she shouldn't be around. And those things were all drilled into my head as a young boy too, where, from the alcoholic parent, everybody was accepted. And from the codependent parent, nobody was accepted. And it was just trying to navigate and find that middle ground. And as I've said before, I've been tagged and classified by numerous people as a black and white thinker. And what I needed to do was live in the gray, live away from the alcoholic part, but also live away from that codependent, no one's good enough type thing. Because what you get from the alcoholic perspective is, I'm not good enough. It was like I had done all the right things, but it was too grown up for me and I was going to screw it up. Well, the self-fulfilling prophecy keeps right on rolling. Some years later, through social media, when it was in its infancy, I was able to try and reconnect with that daughter, which obviously didn't go well in the beginning, and it had to have time to evolve. And that took years. It had to have time to feel safe, let's say. And I'm convinced that I still would have screwed it up had it not been for recovery, because I would have tried too hard, or I would have bent over too far backwards to make things work, and I would have not been in a good headspace. So all of these things happen. And after I spent a few years in recovery, my sponsor, he's not the most boisterous guy in the world, just a great guy, and kind of soft-spoken most of the time, but when he talks, people listen. And otherwise he wouldn't be a very good sponsor or a teacher of recovery or a mentor. And I was on the phone with him one night some years ago, and he says to me, we were going over some of my issues in regards to my daughter. He had actually asked about her because everybody that I knew in recovery knew that I had a child that I wasn't in contact with. I met other men who had started to reconcile their relationships with their children, and they might have been alcoholics or drug addicts or whatever, but not all of them were. All of them had totally different issues. Maybe it was mental health, maybe it was emotional issues and traumas and things that color their perception of life. So everyone knew, not the details. I didn't walk around with family pictures and give out names and phone numbers and say, please pray for this person or whatever. Because, just like AA, my recovery group is anonymous. You don't share outside of the group who you see there or what their issues are or who they're related to or any of that kind of thing. Because bottom line, for anybody considering recovery from anything, if you don't have a safe place in which to share things, you will not share them. And I'll get into the levels of sharing sometime as I see them. And they're increments, and they're perfectly made for people with anxiety and fear issues. But right after my daughter was born, all the way up through the time that I was separated from her, I was living in fear of losing. And you fill in the blank. Losing my marriage, losing my mind, but at the top of the list was losing my child. And I think I worried about it and overthought it so much that it happened. It's that car wreck that I spent too much time looking out for and I tried too hard, and I screwed it up. So fast forward again to this conversation I'm having with my sponsor, who, as I say, is a mild-mannered guy. He doesn't go off too easy. He doesn't stand on a soapbox very often. He's not over dramatic or over boisterous. He's very matter of fact and very loving and very caring. And I was on the phone with him one night, and he said to me, he says, Wes, there is reconciliation with your daughter in your future. And it's because of where your heart is at. And it's because of what is going on in your life that you're going to be able to handle whatever comes your way. And you're not going to give up, and you're going to be able to admit that you were wrong. And it was probably 18 months after that I sat down to a meal at a restaurant with my daughter, her husband, who I consider my son-in-law, love him to death, and their child, their daughter, who obviously I love to death. And it was because of her husband and his support that things began to happen on her side. Because there was a whole other preparation that was going on in the background for her. And recovery taught me, Wes, this isn't just about you. This is about her timing. This is about her heart. This is not about you fixing old issues. That's something that can happen, but that's your side of the street. She has a side of the street that I needed to be concerned with too. So it goes on and on. There's so many details in there that needed to be fleshed out. Of course, from my worldview, God was watching over me, and God was watching over her. And each of us were being protected, and each of us were being allowed to navigate in our own space until those two spaces crossed over. But I remember when he told me that, I'm like, dude, you don't understand. And he has been through the same thing with a daughter of his, so it's not coincidence that this gentleman was and is a dear friend and sponsor and accountability partner. And all of these things that he was saying to me, there was this huge part of me. It's like, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. Self-defeat. Now, did I have any evidence to go on that it was going to improve? Not in the physical sense, no. But all you do is continue to do the work and let the results take care of themselves, because they will. Do the right thing, and all of the details will fall into place. So after years of beating myself over the head with the fact that I'm a horrible father, and of course being told that on numerous occasions, all of these things did come to pass. And I always say one of the biggest blessings in all of this is my wife, who has been around me in one form or another as a friend, a co-worker, all the way back to when our children were born, because they're only 9 months apart, my daughter and my stepson. She's not some Johnny-come-lately that goes, oh yes, Les has a daughter from a previous marriage and doesn't really know the history of that. She was there from jump. She knew. She lived it with me. She knew the pain, she knew the frustration, she also knew the shame and the guilt and everything else that went on. So it was a couple's thing to see all of this happen and to see these things begin to evolve and to change. And it's turned into something very beautiful. Now, is it the relationship I would have had I always been there? No. Will it ever be? Well, who's to say what the future brings? Not from my point of view, because I sacrificed those years, because I get fed up. It takes me a long time to get fed up, but when I finally do, it's like the door slams shut. I don't like that. I allowed it to happen. In fact, I've said to my daughter on repeated occasions, I still to this day don't know what I was supposed to do in order to fix the issues and keep the ball rolling as far as the relationship when she was a child, but I do know it was my responsibility to do it. And that comes from years of being trained that I need to deal with my side of the street. I need to be able to interact with other people and their agenda be damned. The only thing I'm here for is this child. That was something that I really needed to work on. So it stands to reason that since I didn't have those skills as a young man, everything did fall apart. Now, I could have left it that way, but something inside me would never allow that thread to be cut. That heart level desire to be around my firstborn child never went away. I had absolutely no idea how it was going to happen, but I had to come to the end of myself. There was nothing in me that was going to fix this. And there's been great conversations ever since. But what's really interesting is that while all this was going on, a family member who I don't really think ever cared for me, but again, you got to keep that pristine cover over everything, sent me a scathing email over some dramatic BS that had absolutely nothing to do with reality. But he was pissed at me, and he says to me, "Look at you. You don't even have a relationship with your daughter. She doesn't even want anything to do with you. What does that tell you?" And I'm like, well, first off, you don't know any of the details, but there's nothing really for her to love or hate about me. It's, I'm just a story and a picture in a shoebox somewhere. But it was ironic that it wasn't long after that, because of course that hurt. Somebody says something like that, it hurts. Someone who never took the time to really care about what was going on in my life, like I say, blood relative, but is going to stand in judgment of me and what is or isn't happening in my life. But the strange part is it wasn't long after that I sat down to this meal, and I'm like, the person who is verbally vomiting all of this crap on me is someone who refuses to look at the idea that there might be something bigger going on in life than him. To him, life's just one big party, and it's all to hide insecurities. There's a multitude of them, and the guy who surrenders and says, "I'm done fighting and I want to learn a new way," that's the guy who things were changing for. Not the one who says, I'm going to get on top of this and I'm going to be in control and that's not the guy who's winning, to coin that stupid phrase from a few years ago. A couple episodes ago, I said that we are seen as ministers of reconciliation. And my sponsor told me at the time, told me many times before, and reminded me times afterwards, that God is a God of reconciliation. So that's where my standpoint is, in my way of thinking. As I said, my worldview, the proof's in the pudding. I don't need to prove to anyone why this is happening, how this is happening. The desire has always been there to be in a relationship with my daughter, but the tools were not there until later on in life, until salvation, until sobriety, until recovery. Those are necessary steps for me to be able to become more like the person I want to be. And you deal with what you can deal with on your side of the street, and the details will take care of themselves. Here's the key. They will not be taken care of in your timing, and they will not be taken care of in your way, but they will be taken care of. And if you can hang your hat on that and not have to have everything come out your way all the time, in your timing, your life will begin to improve. It's that simple of an equation. It's a lot more complex when you start digging into your own stuff. But again, humans make it complicated. God doesn't. So, with all that said, I'm going to wrap up Interlude 3 and prepare for Interlude 4, which is going to be just me celebrating some of the artists and some of the things that I've run into regarding recovery, mental health, all different kinds of things. And then I'm going to get back into the ACOA issues that I was working on before, and that'll be coming up with episode either 11 and 12 or 12 and 13. I don't know. Don't ask me to be perfect. Love y'all. See ya. Intro and ending music by Jimmy Page. Background music by Incompetech.com. This has been a production of AudioRising.com 2016.